Three. Here we are. You know what it do. Mestizo Coffee Click in full effect. 2021 with a gun and some knowledge, which serves as bullets. And we're ready to pull it. I'm here with my man, Ray Salazar. See, Ray, you have to forgive me. I'm fucking up names. But I suspect.
You haven't had enough coffee.
If I told you this was empty, I wouldn't be lying. But Ray, I suspect your name has long been fucked up in life. Is that not true? Have people mispronounced your name, mistaken you for someone else?
I did get called Ray Suarez once, and I was like, I'll take that. Like, yeah, like if you're confusing me with Ray Suarez, the big old journalist, yeah, I'll take that.
Ray Suarez is dope. I like him. NPR guy, right? But you are Ray Salazar. You are the White Rhino, and you're connecting with us, the Mestizo Coffee Click from Chicago, and you are enjoying your time during quarantine, or what's that been like for you?
It's gotten me to rethink what matters. And so it started early on. I mean, we're exactly a year ago where all of this started. And the big question that I've been thinking about over and over is what matters. And, that applies to me personally, professionally, in every aspect, financially. It's really gotten me to dig deep and ask myself some serious questions and make some tough decisions, some good decisions about what needs to happen next.
Well, I'm excited to have you here because you've done a lot of writing and thinking and speaking in public, not only in your role as an educator in the city of Chicago, where you teach English to high school students, but also as a journalist and as a commentator. Tell us a little bit about why you got into teaching and how you've extended your voice as a teacher.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. I mean, I appreciate getting another opportunity to share that. I fell into teaching because I didn't go to law school. My dream when I was 15, 16 years old was I wanted to be a lawyer, but I didn't have the resources. I didn't have the mentorship to take that route. And so what do we do when we kind of freak out? We kind of revert to what we know. And so I reverted to school because I like school and I was a pretty good reader and a pretty good writer. And so I just went with education. I'm glad I did, because what somebody made me realize not too long ago was that what I really wanted to do was do stuff in the world that increased the amount of justice in the world. And I think I do that as a teacher, as an educator. And then I went to graduate school at DePaul and for the writing program in my late 20s. And that's where I learned to write. And that's where I learned how to interview people and put profiles together. By chance, I got an opportunity to get my father's story about being a bracero on NPR on All Things Considered in 2002. And that was beautiful because that was the first time I heard publicly, Ray Salazar is a writer in Chicago. And so you can imagine, wow, that's everything for me. Yeah. So I work to make sure that my labor as an educator contributes to spaces that are just, that are academically challenging and emotionally comfortable. And then with my writing, I make sure that I work to amplify the issues that need more attention.
Yeah, no, that's, as you know, part of the mission of Mestizo is to do what you alluded to, which is to simply make the world less whack, to eliminate. Well, in fact, I think you've even said it, if you drink the right coffee, get your mind in the right place, you can go out and make a new world or something like that. What was your, you can
conquer the world. Yeah, so I started buying Mestizo coffee. I checked it out and I was like, man, this makes you feel like you can go out and conquer the world, but like in a socially just way, not like not like the conquistadores, not like you conquer it in a good way.
That's right. We're gonna eliminate whackness, and a lot of that has to do with clear thinking, and your job as an English instructor is to teach students how to think clearly and then how to communicate clearly. Is that right?
Yeah, and I don't call myself an English teacher. When people ask me, what I do, I say I'm a writing teacher. I teach AP English language and journalism, and the idea is I want to help my students find their voice and use their voice in real ways. One of the things that was missing from my education in Chicago, in the Catholic schools and in the public schools, was that I didn't get an authentic connection to what we were doing, and I love to learn. Like, I love documentaries, and my parents, valued education, and my dad and I used to love watching documentaries, and, my mom would take us to the library. And so I liked learning, but there was just such a line between what was happening in school and what was happening in the real world that I didn't see myself, when I was young, as somebody political. Like I thought that was like, you had to be like, running for office and stuff. And so I didn't have that identity. I didn't find my Chicano identity until I was at DePaul and I took a Chicano lit class. And all of a sudden I was like, wow, this is my history. Like my dad was a farm worker. My mom is an immigrant. She came here as a teenager. And so I think what I'm trying to do now is ensure that my students who are in the Southwest side getting educated in the same zip code that I got educated and miseducated in, making sure that they're getting the education that I should have gotten. And there's no regret in that. There's no remorse, there's no coraje in that. It happened and it created me as, the person that I am. And now it's my job to make sure that students get other opportunities that's going to help them go farther.
Now, in this process, you've taken on the moniker White Rhino.
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Yeah, so I had a conversation with a friend some years ago. This was before I started writing, and I got invited to speak at a college class, a college education class, and I talked a little bit about teaching. And then I ran into one of the guys, and now we're good friends now. And he saw me. He's like, "Hey, you're Ray." I was like, "Yeah, how you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I'm an English teacher too. I'm a White Rhino." I'm like, "What are you talking about, dude?" And so, then it clicked. I was like, yeah, white rhinos are an endangered species. They must fight to survive. There's very few of them. And at all of the schools that I've taught at in Chicago, I have been the first Latino male English teacher. And kids don't always know what to do with that, because they're just like, oh, I've had Latino, male math teachers, but like you teaching English and like you can command the English language sometimes better than some of the white people in the building. And so kids are like, wait, Shakespeare? Like you can quote that and that, and like, and you're Chicano? They're like, whoa, and like they don't know what to do with that. So that gives me a little bit of an opportunity and advantage. And then I have to follow through on the responsibility to make sure that I deliver a high quality learning experience for them.
Now you teach in Chicago. I'm in Los Angeles, and in the Southwest. Most of us in the Southwest are aware of the fact, of course, that there are a lot of Mexican Americans in the Southwest, and not always aware that there's a long-standing history of Mexican and Mexican Americans in Chicago. Talk a little bit about the Mexican American community in Chicago and about the student population that you work with.
Yeah, so just like Chicago is known for being segregated and having segregated neighborhoods, we have different Mexican neighborhoods. So like the oldest one is on the southeast side over by like 91st and Commercial. And that they're like probably now like starting their fourth generation of Mexican Americans there. They were a population that had a lot of employment in the steel mills. Those closed in the early 90s. And that, of course, had economic and social impacts on that community. And then there is 18th Street. There's Pilsen, and that's kind of fighting gentrification now. That's where my parents first immigrated in the 60s. And then there's 26th Street. That's Little Village. That's where I'm from. And that's where the like second big movement of Mexican families happened. My parents were the first Mexicans on the block. They bought a house in the 26th Street neighborhood, and they were the first ones there. And it was a hopping area. To this day, 26th Street, it's like a 1 mile stretch, contributes the second highest revenue to the city, right behind Michigan Avenue, right behind the Magnificent Mile in downtown. It's got economic power, but the community has not figured out how to leverage that for social and political power yet. Like it's still struggling there. And then, of course, there's the North Side communities, and the North Side communities are a bigger mix. Those communities aren't segregated because you'll get Puerto Ricans and Mexicans and some Cubans and maybe some Dominicans. But every area has its history and its identity, right? So it's like I claim Little Village, like that's where I'm from.
Right. Yeah. I mean, in Los Angeles, it would make no sense to talk about Los Angeles without talking about its Mexican American history and community. Although I almost never hear people talk about Chicago in reference to the Mexican American community, at least in pop culture. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause, again, I'm in Los Angeles. Does that sound right to you? Or
no, it's right. I think the Chicago story hasn't been told. I think, when we hear of the Mexican experience in the U.S., we think Los Angeles, we think Texas. And so people forget that the Midwest is this, rich and thriving area with so many stories of Mexican heritage and ancestry. And, I think that we just, the right person, the right people haven't figured out that there are stories here that needs to be told. The stories that, Sandra Cisneros got some big hype in the 90s for House on Mango Street. as an English teacher, I think that was a great piece of work. I think it served its time, but I don't see it being taught as much anymore, and I wouldn't teach it. Like I think that era is done. I think we're looking for the next big idea that's going to help communicate the complexity of stories here. There's a couple of works out there that are set in Chicago. I'm not going to talk about them, but I'm not.
Okay.
I don't think they're that good.
All right, I'm gonna have to tap into that. I want to know what you're talking about. But it's actually interesting that you make this connection back to school. Your approach to teaching. So talk about the students you teach and your approach. You draw an interesting distinction between serving in a academic capacity versus kind of a social capacity and the challenges there.
Yeah, absolutely. This is my 26th year, I think, in education, and I have always taught on the Southwest side, mostly Latino students. I did teach in the downtown area once at one of the top city schools, and I was there for 4 years, but it was a good experience. I learned a lot, and I think it made me a better teacher and a better advocate because I saw how these high achieving kids were treated, and I was like, wait, they don't got to wear uniforms? Like, wait, they can like sit in the hallway during lunch and nobody says anything to them? It's like, what's up? Why do they got all this freedom? And how come the kids back in the other school I used to teach at are like on regimented, all these schedules and they don't have all this freedom? So I'm like, that got me thinking, right? So I came back to the Southwest side because I said, this is where I want to use my intellect. And I teach at a school now that used to be a neighborhood, a regular old neighborhood high school where the kids, everybody in the neighborhood was enrolled. And then we did some advocacy because we said, well, wait a minute, there's all these selective enrollment schools in affluent parts of the city, but our Southwest side deserves a selective enrollment school too. And it's definitely not to exclude kids, but it's to change the narrative, because the narrative was always, well, there's not a lot of kids who can test in anyway, so, there's no need for that. And now we've still maintained that neighborhood feel because the majority of our students, it's like 90%, come from the surrounding zip codes. So we're fighting that narrative. We have our counter narrative that says, no, there's a lot of kids who got some smarts. They got some book smarts and they got some drives. So there's that part, right? It's providing that academic experience so the kids can learn. But definitely over the last, 10 years, it's shifted over to where I have to provide a lot of social emotional support too, because of the way that the world has changed. And, nobody teaches you how to do that. And I'll be honest with you, in my teacher preparation program, I barely learned how to teach. And I think most people who go through traditional teacher preparation programs will say that. But now you got this whole, social emotional side. So I have to kind of really turn on my people skills. And this is where I realized, like, I've been learning how to do this my whole life. It's because I grew up the way that I did and I struggled financially and I had all these other situations that makes me sensitive to the kid now who tells me, I can't make it to class because I'm working full time. And I was like, you know what? I've been there. When I was in college, I was working third shift and I would sometimes make it to my first class. And sometimes when I was there, I would fall asleep and the professor hated me. Because I didn't advocate. I didn't explain to the professor what was happening. Once I was able to explain to him, everything changed and I had his full support. So I'm teaching kids to advocate for themselves. And, sometimes, Carlos, it's some tough love too. It's just like, I had a situation with a couple of debate students this weekend and they got beat up pretty hard at one of the tournaments. And I was just like, well, like, this is it. You got a choice. You can kind of, wipe off the dust and get ready to do this again, or you can sit here and wallow and, feel sorry for yourself. Like, that's it. You got two options. Pick one and let me know what you want to do, because we got to continue.
Sure. No, and I can see how, as a teacher of color serving students who haven't had male teachers in authority in this way before, might demand more social, emotional resources from you, and or other teachers in their life, teachers of color. I've seen this happen on campuses with women teachers as well. Yeah. And there's a risk of maybe putting our attention away from the academic and into the personal. And it's important for us to remember, like, how we can best serve these students is through preparing them academically. Isn't that right? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Like all the relationships that I establish with students are based on academics first. And so I'm against this whole idea that, first, you can't do any academic work for a month because you have to do the getting to know you games and icebreakers. Like, no, hell no, ain't nobody got time for that. Like, you do an icebreaker and then let's jump into some reading and some writing and some talking about some ideas, because, it lets kids decide. When we do that and we ground the relationships in academics, it lets students decide what they want to share with us. and how much they want to share with us. And if they
Mm.
don't want to share, they don't have to, because they have this other entry point, which can be, well, you know what? I don't want to talk about my life, but I want to talk about what we just read, and we can have a conversation about that.
No, that's powerful. Now, I really wanted to dive into three kind of areas that, I've spent some time in the classroom as a teacher, and I found that the way that I talk, look, and act in the classroom all had an impact on how effective I was. So I wondered if you found that to be true. So I'm curious, how does the language you use in a classroom
Yeah.
impact your effectiveness?
You're taking me back to 1995 and my first teaching job when I was 22 years old, at an alternative high school in Little Village. And, here I was, grown up in the neighborhood, and I was working with a bunch of students who had struggled academically. All of them had dropped out or had been pushed out, and this was their second attempt to get their high school education. And, they were facing, most of the young men were facing situations with gangs. Most of the young women were parents already. And so they're looking at me like, wait a minute, you grew up here and you never gangbanged? And, like they're going through the checklist, right? And then I would always show up, with dress pants and a dress shirt and a tie and, some shiny shoes. And so I got nicknamed GQ. And I was like socially still still kind of awkward, still kind of trying to figure out how am I going to communicate, but again, it was just like, they didn't know what to do with me, because they're like, wait a minute, right? And then, this was before internet, so kids would have to call in if they weren't going to make it to school. And so there was a message that I left on my phone, and they would be like, man, you sound white. I'm like, what do you mean I sound white? Like, man, you sound white, like, when you're on the phone. And it's like, well, this is how I sound. This is how I talk. And so it was a good learning experience, because all of a sudden they were being faced with a reflection of the community. And honestly, I was being faced with a reflection of the community, because I was seeing all of these young people who weren't able to escape, avoid, the gangs and other situations. And so it made me confront some realities in the neighborhood that honestly I had either been in denial about, or I just didn't know.
Right. And so the way you kind of talked, well, see, I'm interested in like the way language operates in the classroom. Right? In fact, most cases teacher wield the microphone 95% of the time. They're always talking, and there's power relationships that are at play, and it usually comes out in language. Yeah. And so I'm always interested in when I observe a class. So even when I'm in my kids' classroom and watching their teachers, just how they interact and the language they decide to use. How conscious of you are? How conscious of you? How conscious are you of that?
My identity has changed, over the years. I'll be 48 next month, and I'm definitely, in a much more confident place than I was 26 years ago. But for me, my priority has always been making sure that classrooms are a place where students' voices are heard and amplified. And so I've kind of, because I was, I used to be like really shy, and I kind of took that kind of behind the scenes role, where it was like, I need to create learning experiences where students are speaking up. So it's like making sure I had good questions, a good series of questions. And man, I was like, when I used to teach, I had like a script. It looked like a movie script, man. I'd be like, no, I got to say this. And then 3 seconds later, I got to say that. And then, and it was just like, that's what I needed to make myself feel prepared. And it would work, because there was some structure, but there was lots of openness and lots of flexibility for kids to kind of do their thing. And again, back in 1995, kids didn't always know what to do with that, especially kids who had struggled in the traditional academic system. So I think, when I tell my son and my daughter, who are both teenagers now, every morning I tell them, be seen and be heard. And so that's what I make sure that I communicate to my young people too. And we're doing this remotely now. They don't have to leave their cameras on. Nobody has their cameras on anymore. Like, that's fine. I'm not going to have that battle. But I'm like, no. When it's time to participate, let's go. You're either talking or typing, either in the chat box, or I need to hear you. Let's go. And we're not going to have, 10-minute wait or 10-second wait times. No, we're going to drop a question. You got a couple of seconds, and boom, let's go. Here we go. Let's get some ideas flowing.
Well, that's really powerful. Being seen and being heard, just as a motto, as a way forward in life. Now, you teach editorial writing, is that right?
So I teach with a journalism class. I teach, we do a little bit of photojournalism, and we always struggle a little bit with that. News articles, editorials. We've done some podcasts. So we get a little creative, and that class is fun. I like it because number one, we produce the school newspaper, and number two, it's just an opportunity for kids to do different types of writing, and they struggle with that too because I'm like, no, this is going to be published, like that's the goal, and they're like, oh man, like this is. When I first started there, I had to kind of change the culture. And one of the young women told me, like, why do we have to write like real stuff? Why can't it be like fake news? And this was before fake news was a term. What are you talking about? She's like, yeah, well, before sometimes we could just like write an article and put at the bottom, this is not true. Like, because that's irresponsible. Like we're not doing that. Like this is real.
Right.
So for many of them, this is the first time they're going to see their name in print, and so that's really cool. And then AP English language is, the traditional, in some way, the name, at least in name, it's the traditional college writing class. But I take an unconventional approach. So like we opened up this year, I pushed aside what I normally do. And for the first 10 weeks, we looked at texts that explore the stages of grief. And so, we read Ibram Kendi's essay about the denial of racism in the U.S. We analyzed AOC's speech for the anger unit when she talked back and stood up for herself because Yoho insulted her. And so, I try to bring in those contemporary events as much as possible, because otherwise, what's the point? It's like, how can I be like, we be in the middle of a pandemic and we're like reading this novel and the kids are like, bro, like my dad was sick, or, my mom paid the rent, and he's like, oh, I got to get to work in 1 hour. And we're pretending as if nothing is going on in the world. Wow, that's just inauthentic. Yeah.
I had a moment of reflection last week where I was like, wait a minute, they really try to make me read fucking Canterbury Tales in high school? Like, why in the fuck would I care about Canterbury Tales, bro?
Wow.
It's just really, really not crafted with our students in mind for the most. There's been a lot of movement in the last 25 years. I will say that. It sounds like you've been able to diversify your curriculum, and that's obviously really important.
My first conference presentation was a presentation called "Hamlet Could Have Been Chicano," and I talked about the challenges that he faced to satisfy the parental expectations and the relationship expectations, and kind of struggling to find out who he is. And I don't know. I made some connection, some stuff to. There's a lot. But it was a connection to finding your identity as a Chicano, and it went well, and we didn't read the whole thing. I pulled scenes from it, and we had a good time with it. We have to be okay with modifying what's been traditionally done, even if we're doing these canonical texts, which arguably should or should not be taught, whatever.
Right.
But if we're going to teach it, there's got to be some connection to young people, so that we're not like, why am I reading about these people like going on this thing and like. Who cares?
Right. Now, what happens? No, tell me a little bit more about the event, the signing up for editorial writing in high school. How long is the event? When does it happen?
Yeah,
and,
so
what can people expect?
I decided to offer this workshop for any high school teacher, and maybe middle school teachers are welcome as well. It is a 90-minute workshop happening on Saturday, 9:30 Chicago time, so it's a little early over there. But if people get up, for a 7:30 workshop on Saturday, they got the rest of the day, right? They can enjoy LA the rest of the day. And so we'll be looking at, how to teach. It really is about how to teach young people to write thoughtful editorials. So we're talking about gathering ideas, using narrative in editorials, finding research efficiently, writing quality research efficiently, how to structure editorials so that we go beyond the old, 5-paragraph essay, which should be banned, like outlawed, and then how to provide feedback to students in efficient ways, because teachers will be like, great, they're writing editorials. Now I got 80 editorials I got to read. I got some systems and some practices that will get you through that real quick, and it'll help provide students with some meaningful feedback.
And if they went to Eventbrite, they'd be able to find the event there and be able to purchase their ticket?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to eventbrite.com and type in teaching editorial writing, and it pops up right there. Or you can go to the White Rhino blog on chicagonow.com, and it's the first post as you scroll down.
Ray, it's been exciting to connect. There's been a testament to the power of the internet to put like-minded folks into contact, and maybe we'll look forward to collaborating. I think I have some ideas brewing in ways that we can work together to
let's do it, man.
Whack.
two Chicano minds from across the country. I don't know. We could do some stuff.
Pick up something, set something on fire.
There you go, man. And hey, I'm waiting on those 2 bags of coffee, so I'll keep an eye on those.
Hey, I got you. Which reminds me,